The fluorescent lights of the Bayside Diner always hummed a flat, buzzing E note. It was a sound I'd come to associate with bad coffee and insomnia. Tonight, it was also the sound of sanctuary. It was well past midnight, maybe 2, maybe 3 in the morning. The 24/7 joint sat squat and bright against the darkness. Just off the Belt Parkway, a concrete beacon for truckers and the sleepless souls of South Brooklyn. I was one of the latter. My apartment, usually my safe haven, felt contaminated. Earlier today, yesterday, technically my supervisor, Mark, had cornered me by the data servers. It wasn't the first time, but it was the worst. The smell of his cologne, the way his eyes lingered, the quiet suggestion about my performance review. My skin was still crawling. I'd grabbed my keys and just left, needing air that wasn't recycled through the same vents as him. I stared into my mug. The coffee was bitter, burnt hours ago. I'm Maya Ellis. I'm 28 years old, and my life is meticulously organized by day. I'm a data entry specialist, finding patterns in endless spreadsheets. 2 nights a week, I work at the community library, shelving books in blessed silence. My life is supposed to be quiet. That's why I saw him. In a booth across the aisle, partially hidden by a wilting plastic fern, sat a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 9. He was alone, his small shoulders hunched. But it wasn't his solitude that caught my eye. It was his hands. They were moving, sharp, frantic little gestures. Help, lost, scared. My blood went cold. I looked around. There were maybe 5 other people in the diner. A trucker at the counter, hunched over a plate of eggs. A couple in the back, arguing in low whispers. Gus, the owner, was wiping down the counter, pointedly looking away from the boy's booth. They all saw him, and they were all ignoring him. Gus actually looked terrified. I knew the language. My Aunt Clara, my mother's sister, had been deaf. I'd spent summers with her in Red Hook, becoming fluent in ASL before I'd even mastered long division. Her hands had been my connection to a world of expressive silence. The boy signed again, his face crumpling. Please help! I left my coffee and slid into the vinyl booth opposite him. His head snapped up, eyes wide and startled. They were a deep, clear hazel. I kept my movements slow, gentle. I raised my hands. Are you okay? His breath hitched. He stared at my hands as if they were magic. He signed back. His movements fast, practiced. You see me. You understand. I understand, I signed. My name is Maya. What's yours? He spelled it out, Leo. Where are your parents, Leo? Are you lost? His eyes filled with tears, but he held them back. I was with my watcher. I went to the bathroom. When I came out, he was gone. A watcher. A bodyguard. I waited. He didn't come back. I was scared. I ran here. You're safe now, I assured him. We can call your father. Panic flashed across his face. He shook his head violently. No, Dad will be angry. He'll be so angry. He won't be angry that you're safe, I signed, trying to channel Aunt Clara's calm. He's just worried. He's always angry, Leo signed, his expression bleak. This was bad. I looked over at Gus, who was now polishing the same spot on the counter, his knuckles white. Sir, I called out. Gus flinched. This boy is lost. We need to call his father. Gus looked at Leo, then at me. Lady, I don't want no trouble. It's just a lost kid. I said, what's the trouble? I turned back to Leo. What is your last name? Honey, I need it for the phone. He hesitated, then signed it slowly, as if testing the weight of the word, Vitale. I didn't recognize it. I turned back to the counter. His name is Leo Vitale. The sound of the trucker's fork clattering against his plate was deafening in the sudden silence. Gus went pale, a sickly, gray color under the fluorescent lights. He swallowed, hard. Oh, God, Gus whispered, fumbling under the counter, presumably for a phone. You just stay right there, both of you. Before Gus could even dial, the diner door burst open, slamming against the wall. The little bell didn't jingle, it screamed. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of expensive wool and ozone. 3 men filled the doorway. They weren't cops. They were dressed in dark, impeccably tailored overcoats. They moved with a predatory grace, a heavy, measured discipline that sucked the air out of the room. But it was the man in the center who held the room captive. He was older, maybe 38, taller than the others, with dark hair cut short and practical. He didn't look around. His eyes scanned the room once, found Leo, and locked on. The relief that washed over his face was so profound, so human, it almost made him look normal. Almost. Papa Leo was out of the booth in a flash, running and crashing into the man's legs. The man in the dark coat didn't yell. He didn't scold. He dropped to one knee, ignoring the grime on the diner floor, and wrapped his arms around his son. He held him tightly for a second, his eyes closed. Then he pulled back, his large hands framing Leo's face, checking him for injuries. His hands moved, signing something too fast for me to catch, a question. Leo turned, his face bright with relief, and pointed directly at me. His small hands flew. She understood me, Papa. She sat with me. She talked to me. The man's head snapped toward me. The relief vanished, replaced by an intense, chilling appraisal. He looked at me like I was a problem he hadn't anticipated, a variable that had just corrupted his entire equation. He stood up slowly, lifting Leo effortlessly into his arms. He walked toward my booth. His men fanned out, one by the door, one moving toward the back hallway. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't have to. Their presence was enough. He stopped at my table. Alessandro Sandro Vitale. I didn't know the name then, but I knew the type. This was the kind of man who owned things. People, neighborhoods, the kind of family boss my grandfather used to whisper about, the ones who kept the peace by promising a very specific kind of war. "My son," he said. His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that vibrated in my chest. "He said you spoke with him." "He was scared," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "He was signing for help. No one was listening." Sandro's gaze was heavy. "You know the signs." "I know ASL, yes. My aunt was deaf." He shifted Leo on his hip. Leo was watching us, his head resting on his father's shoulder. Sandro's eyes narrowed, studying my face, my hands. "You're not from Red Hook," he stated. It wasn't a question. "My aunt lived there. I spent summers with her." "Your accent," he said. "In your signing, it's specific. It's the old dialect." I frowned. "I don't know what that means. I just sign how she taught me. She had a few, I guess. Family signs, ways of saying things." I thought for a moment, remembering Aunt Clara, like this one. She always used this when she meant family or safe or our circle. I raised my hand and made the sign. It was a variation of the standard sign for family, but with a slight twist of the wrist and a tap of the thumb, an old Italian sign, influenced by LS, though I didn't know it at the time. Sandro Vitale froze. It wasn't a subtle pause. It was a complete cessation of movement. His breathing stopped, his eyes, already intense, bored into me with a sudden, violent shock. He looked at me as if I had just spoken the name of a ghost. One of his men, the one by the door, leaned back in. He spoke low and fast. "Boss, we have a problem." That was a pop. Lupetti's crew. 3 blocks east, sniper. The spell was broken, the father disappeared, and the capo took his place. The air temperature in the diner dropped 10 degrees. "Lock it," Sandro ordered. His voice was sharp. The man at the door flipped the deadbolt and pulled the blinds, plunging the diner into an eerie, isolated quiet, broken only by the hum of the lights and the gurgle of the coffee pot. "What's happening?" I asked, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. Sandro looked at me. The shock was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "You're in my protection now. You will stay here until my men have cleared the area." "I don't need protection," I stammered, grabbing my coat. "I'm just going home." "They just took a shot 3 blocks from here," he said, his voice flat, final. "They weren't shooting at truckers. They were shooting at us, and now you've been seen with us." I was trapped, a prisoner of circumstance. sitting in a vinyl booth that smelled like stale grease. We sat in silence for what felt like an hour. It was probably only 10 minutes. Sandro stood by the booth, holding his son, who'd fallen asleep against his shoulder. He just watched me. Finally, his phone buzzed. He looked at it. "It's clear." His men relaxed. Fractionally, the one at the door unlocked it. Sandro adjusted Leo in his arms. "My car is outside. My men will drive you home." "No, thank you," I said, standing up, my bag clutched to my chest. "I appreciate the situation, but I'll call a cab." "That wasn't a request. Miss Ellis," he said. How did he know my name? He must have seen my wallet or my library card on the table. "I don't get in cars with strangers," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Before he could argue, Leo stirred. He'd been awake, apparently, watching us. He looked at his father and, very deliberately, signed, "I want her." Sandro frowned, signing back. "What do you mean?" "I want to learn with her. Papa, she understands." Sandro looked from his son's pleading face back to me. I was no longer just a liability. I wasn't just a witness. I was, suddenly, something else. An asset. A tool. I could see the wheels turning in his head. This man didn't just stumble into things. He calculated. He planned. And I, Maya Ellis, the data analyst who just wanted a quiet cup of coffee, had just become a line item in his ledger. I didn't know it then. I didn't know about Damian Rourke, the tech billionaire trying to swallow the Sunset Marine Terminal whole. I didn't know Rourke was backing the Lupetti crew, the very men who'd just put a bullet in the air 3 blocks away. I didn't know the Vitale family was the only thing standing between Rourke's concrete empire and the homes of thousands of dock workers and families. All I knew was that this man, this Sandro Vitale, was offering me a ride. And I knew that Damian Rourke, a man I'd never met, had just discovered the Mafia boss's new, apparent weakness, the woman who could speak to his silent son. The invitation wasn't an invitation. It was a summons delivered in the quietest, most polite way possible. 2 days after the diner, a man in a suit that probably cost more than my last 3 months' rent found me shelving books at the library. He didn't introduce himself. He just handed me a card with an address on Staten Island and a time. "Mr. Vitale requests your presence to discuss a tutoring position for his son," he said, his voice flat. "A car will be waiting, 3 p.m., Tuesday." I should have said no. I should have told him I was a data analyst, not a tutor, and that I didn't want anything to do with men who had watchers for their children and enemies with sniper rifles. But I couldn't forget the look in Leo's eyes. She understands me. And so, on Tuesday at 3 o'clock, I found myself in a black sedan crossing the Verrazano, watching the skyline of Brooklyn recede. The Vitale residence wasn't a house. It was a compound, a modern fortress of gray stone and smoked glass perched on the edge of the island, staring defiantly at the Atlantic. There were gates, cameras, and men who looked like they were carved from the same stone as the walls. But Sandro didn't take me to the main house. He led me around the side, through a manicured garden, to a large, Victorian-style greenhouse. The air inside was warm, humid, and smelled of damp earth and jasmine. It was filled with plants, orchids, ferns, even a small lemon tree. "There are no cameras in here," Sandro said, his voice softer in this space. "No microphones. Leo feels cornered by the security. He needs a place where he can be a boy, not just the package." Leo was sitting at a small wooden table, drawing. When he saw me, he lit up, his hands a blur. "Maya, you came." I sat down. "I came. How are you?" And so it began. 3 afternoons a week, I'd take the ferry, and a silent driver would pick me up. We spent our time in the greenhouse. I quickly learned the landscape of Leo's isolation, and he was surrounded by people, but profoundly alone. His watchers always too. Stationed just outside the glass doors were respectful but distant. I found the reports from his previous tutors, left in a file. They were clinical, cold. Subject exhibits behavioral resistance. difficulty in maintaining focus, a troublesome case. They'd treated him like a broken appliance. They didn't see the bright, fiercely intelligent kid trapped behind the silence and the security. They saw a rara avis, a problem to be managed. Only Sandro, in his own terse, disciplined way, seemed to have any patience for him. But Sandro was the sun, and he was often eclipsed by business. They think I'm stupid. Leo signed one afternoon, his movements sharp and angry. He'd knocked over an empty watering can. "You're not stupid, might I sign back? You're angry." His eyes widened. I realized he didn't have the specific sign for it. His vocabulary was practical, yes, no, hungry, hurt, bathroom. He had no words for the storm inside him. So, I started a new project. We created a vocabulary of feelings. I taught him frustrated a hand brushing past the chin, proud a hand rising up the chest, anxious like troubled but fluttering, lonely a single finger drawing a line down the chest. For the first time, Leo could name the shadows. It was like opening a locked door. I saw Sandro, too. Not often, he'd stand at the edge of the greenhouse, half hidden by a large palm, just watching. He never interrupted. He ran his world with an iron fist, but it was a fist guided by a rigid, almost archaic code. One afternoon, I heard him on the phone just outside the door, his voice a low, lethal hum. "I don't care what they did. You find out who hit their dry cleaning business, and you fix it. The owner's wife is deaf. The Vitale family does not touch the deaf community. We protect it. Is that clear?" It was a chilling blend. This was a man who clearly operated outside the law, who dealt in shadows and implied consequences. Yet he drew these bright, immovable lines. No women, no children, and, apparently, no one associated with the deaf community. It wasn't rose-colored. I knew what fixing it probably meant. It meant his brand of defensive violence. It meant ironclad discipline for those who crossed his lines. As Leo's trust in me grew, the pieces of their lives began to surface. He started talking about his mother. "She loved the ocean," he signed one day, pointing out the window at the gray water. "She smelled like salt and flowers, like this place." "She sounds wonderful," I signed gently. "Where is she?" His hands faltered. "Gone." There was a boom. "At the port. Papa. Papa was very sad. He's been sad for a long time." Later, I pieced it together from whispers between the staff and a few pointed questions to Gino Marchetti, Sandro's right-hand man, who sometimes drove me home. There was an explosion at the Sunset Marine Terminal a few years back, a loading crane, faulty maintenance, a corner-cutting contractor. Sandro's wife had been there, visiting a community project she funded. The contractor was linked to a holding company that got a massive insurance payout and then vanished. The name of that holding company, I would learn, had Damien Rourke's fingerprints all over it. My two worlds, the quiet, data-driven world of the library and the high-stakes silence of the Vitale compound, were about to collide. My old mentor from the Red Hook Community Library called me. "Maya," she said, her voice frantic, "you still have contacts at the Deaf Center, right Aunt Clara's old place." "A few," I said. "Why, what's wrong?" "They're being evicted, a developer. They got a notice giving them 30 days. 30 A-shell company called Sunrise Holdings bought the building, and they're leveling the block." My blood ran cold. I spent that night not on Vitale business, but on my own. I did what I do best. I followed the data. I dug into public records, property databases, incorporation filings. Sunrise Holdings was a ghost, registered offshore. But the lawyer who signed the eviction notice, his firm was listed as counsel for Damien Rourke's primary real estate venture, the one planning a massive, glossy, green redevelopment of the entire Red Hook waterfront. The next time I saw Sandro, I didn't wait for him to appear in the shadows. I found him in his study, a room of dark wood and the scent of old leather. "He's evicting them," I said, no preamble. Sandro looked up from a ledger. "Who is Rourke, Damien Rourke. He's throwing the Red Hook Deaf Center onto the street. My aunt's center. I thought I heard you protect that community." Sandro stood up. The warmth from the greenhouse was gone. This was the man from the diner, the man who commanded armies. Maya, you are here for my son. You are not here for my business. This isn't business, It is business, he cut me off, his voice dangerously low. It is his business, and mine. What Rourke does with his properties, what I do to stop him, it's not your concern. You need to stay away from the land. Stay away from the terminal. You are a teacher. Be a teacher. I felt the heat rise in my face. It wasn't just my supervisor's greasy hands. It was this, being told to be quiet, to stay in my box. No, I said. My voice didn't shake. I can't. If I don't speak up for them, who will? If people with a voice stay silent, the people who are already voiceless, they just disappear. I won't let that happen. Sandro stared at me, and for a second, I saw that same flicker of shocked appraisal from the diner, but this time, it was mixed with something else, annoyance, and maybe a sliver of respect. You're playing a game you don't understand, Maya, he said, finally. Be careful you don't become a piece in it. The threat hung in the air, unspoken. The world Sandro inhabited was becoming clearer. Rourke, the polished tech billionaire, the Lupetti crew, the vicious, low-level muscle Rourke used for his dirty work, the corrupt cops on the waterfront precinct paid to look the other way, and Sandro, the self-appointed king of this gray area, fighting fire with a different kind of fire. The game found me a week later. I was with Leo at his physical therapy appointment in Bay Ridge. It was a standing appointment, one of the few times he left the compound. We were with two of Sandro's men, including Gino. We were walking back to the car. It happened fast. A black van, tinted windows, screeched to a halt, blocking the sidewalk. 3 men jumped out. They weren't sloppy. They were fast, professional. They moved on Gino and the other guard immediately, engaging them, separating them from us. One of them, his face impassive, grabbed for Leo. Leo froze, his eyes wide with terror. I didn't think. I reacted. The man grabbing Leo was focused on the bodyguards, expecting me to scream or cower. He didn't know our language. I grabbed Leo's arm and signed, fast and hard, right into his line of sight. A sign we'd invented. Lighthouse? Our code for safe place, for hold on. At the same time, I looked at Gino, who was struggling with 2 men. I covered my mouth with one hand, a classic deaf tactic to prevent lip reading, and used my other hand to sign frantically. Van behind you. It was a lie. There was nothing behind him, but the attacker grabbing Leo saw my hands moving. He paused, half turning, thinking I was signaling a threat he couldn't see. It was only half a second. It was all Gino needed. Gino was good, very good. He used the man's distraction, broke free, and put himself between us and the attackers. It wasn't a firefight. It was a brutal, contained explosion of violence that was over in 10 seconds. The men scrambled back into the van. But as it sped away, one of them in the passenger seat wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a phone, and it was pointed directly at me, recording. Gino rushed us into the armored car, his breathing heavy, a dark stain spreading on his sleeve. Are you okay, Maya Leo? Leo was trembling, but he signed, his hands shaking. Maya, safe, lighthouse. I just nodded, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I wasn't just a tutor anymore. I wasn't a data analyst. I was on the board. I was a target. And the man who sent them now had my face. The ride back to Staten Island was silent, suffocating. Gino was on the phone, his voice a low, angry buzz directed at someone named Capo, which I understood meant Sandro. Leo had fallen asleep in my arms, a small, warm weight, but it was the sleep of exhaustion, not peace. His small hands had twitched in his sleep, signing Lighthouse, Lighthouse over and over. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that phone, that lens pointed at me, was burned into my retinas. I was no longer a bystander, a tutor caught in the crossfire. I was a target. My face was now in Damien Rourke's database. And Rourke, I thought about my supervisor, Mark, at the data firm about how small and pathetic his harassment felt compared to this. This was a different league of predator. Rourke wasn't just trying to bully me. He was trying to level a community. He was the one who had made Sandro's wife disappear in a fiery accident. He was the one trying to snatch his son. Sandro's warning echoed in my head, "Stay away from the land." To hell with that. He had just tried to take Leo. He had just filmed me. Staying away wasn't an option anymore. This wasn't just Sandro's fight. They had dragged me into it. When I got back to my own small apartment in South Brooklyn, the feeling of violation from Mark's harassment paled in comparison to the break-in, but that would come later. For now, my apartment was my only true sanctuary, my command center. I didn't go to my library shift. I called in sick. I sat at my computer, the glow of the dual monitors lighting my face in the dark. My day job was data entry, but that was a simplification. I was a researcher, a digital bloodhound. I could find patterns in the noise. I started where I left off Sunrise Holdings, the shell company evicting the Red Hook Deaf Center. I followed the money, the digital paper trail. It was a mess, designed to be a web of offshore accounts, dummy corporations registered in Delaware, the Cayman Islands, Panama. But they all had one thing in common. They all eventually funneled back to a single, massive investment fund managing the Sunset Marine Terminal project, a fund called the Parker Ellis Trust. I stared at the screen. My heart did a slow, painful kick drum roll. Ellis, that was my name. It had to be a coincidence, a very, very common name. But Parker, that was my mother's name, my birth mother. The story I knew was simple, pieced together from fragments my adoptive father told me. My mother, Elizabeth Ellis, had died when I was a baby. He'd taken me in, raised me as his own. He was a quiet man, a history professor, and he'd always told me my mother's family, the Parkers, were complicated and best left in the past. I typed in the trust's directors. I cross-referenced dates. I pulled up old society pages from the 1990s, and there she was, Elizabeth Parker Ellis, my mother. She wasn't just from the Parker family. She was the Parker family, or at least a significant part of it. I dug for 3 days, barely sleeping, fueled by black coffee and a growing sense of dread. The trust wasn't just a fund, it was the fund. It owned a controlling interest in vast swathes of the Brooklyn waterfront, including the Sunset Marine Terminal. And then I found the codicil, the legal document, buried in digital archives. My mother, shortly before she died, had amended her stake. She'd left her shares a full 20% of the trust to her only daughter, me. But it wasn't just shares. She had left me a minority veto, a clause stating that any sale or redevelopment of waterfront property designated as community use, which included the terminal and the land the Deaf Center sat on, required a unanimous vote from the board and her heir. I was the heir. I had veto power. I could stop Damian Rourke. I could save the Deaf Center. I could block the entire terminal project. My father had hidden this from me, not out of malice, I realized, but out of terror. He wanted to protect me from the complicated partners his wife had been involved with, partners who, I was now certain, were people exactly like Damian Rourke. But the clause had a catch. The veto could be legally challenged if the trust could prove the block was frivolous and without merit. To make it stick, I wouldn't just need to say no. I'd need to prove why the sale was corrupt. I'd need hard evidence that Rourke was using bribery, intimidation, and illegal means to secure the deal. I needed proof. I found Sandro in the greenhouse. Leo was with a speech therapist, one-eyed vetted, working on vocalization exercises. It was just the two of us, surrounded by the scent of damp earth. I laid it all out, the trust, the veto, my mother. He listened, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, staring at an orchid. "Rourke doesn't know," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "No, he just thinks I'm Leo's tutor, the girl who got in the way. He has no idea who I am or what I can do." "This is good," he said, turning to face me. The intensity in his eyes was back, but it wasn't cold this time. It was calculating. "You stay clean. You stay inside the law. You prepare your legal challenge. Let me get my hands dirty. I will get you the proof you need." I looked at this man, this anti-hero who lived by a code of honor and violence. I thought of my father, who had hidden me from this world, and I thought of Leo, who was trapped between all of it. "No," I said. His brow furrowed. "No. I won't hide behind you. Sandro, I won't be the clean one while your men get hurt. I'll use the law. Yes, that's my weapon, but I'm not going to be a damsel you protect. We do this together, my way and your way. We form an alliance, law and street honor." He studied me, a long, searching look. I saw the shadow of that shock from the diner again, the surprise. He nodded. "Once, an alliance." Our alliance began not with a handshake, but with a list. "To get Rourke, we need insiders." I said, "He's too slick to leave a paper trail I can find from my laptop. We need people." "I have people," Sandro said. "Not just your people," I corrected. "We need his people, or people he screwed over." We built a network. Sandro used his connections at the port to find a dock worker whose crew was replaced by Rourke's private security, a man named Sal. Sandro also found a master welder, a woman named Diaz, who had been fired from the terminal project for refusing to sign off on substandard materials, the same kind of corner cutting that had cost Sandro his wife. I found the third, a junior data engineer who had just been downsized from Rourke's tech firm. I found him on a forum, complaining about unethical surveillance practices. We met them one by one, in secret, in the back of a bakery in Carroll Gardens, in a quiet, unused chapel. We couldn't use phones. We couldn't use email. Rourke was a tech monster. He monitored everything. So I taught them. In the dim light of the chapel, I taught Sal and Diaz the basics of ASL. We created a set of hand codes, simple signs for danger. Document, Rourke, Lupetti. It was a secure, analog language Rourke's digital spies couldn't crack. In those weeks, something shifted between Sandro and me. He was always there, at every meeting, but he stayed in the shadows. He'd stand by the door, a silent, imposing guardian, and he'd let me do the talking. He let me be the one to build the trust, to explain the plan. I realized I was watching a different kind of power. It wasn't the brute force of the Lupetti crew or the cold, corporate power of Rourke. It was the power of restraint. Sandro was willing to step back, to put me forward because he knew it was the only way to protect his son and his community. He was giving me his platform, his protection, and his trust. It was more intoxicating than any threat. The romantic tension was a quiet, humming wire stretched between us. It wasn't about words. It was about the way he'd watch me sign, his gaze lingering on my hands. It was the way, when I'd get frustrated, he'd step forward and just say, "Breathe, Maya." His voice a low rumble that settled my nerves. It was a shared glance over Leo's sleeping head, a silent acknowledgement that we were in this, together. Rourke, of course, didn't stay quiet. First, the rumors started at my day job. Suddenly, I was Vitaly's girl. My colleagues, including Mark, who had once been so predatory, now looked at me with a mixture of fear and disgust. I was isolated, untouchable. I found a note taped to my monitor, "Mafia whore." Then, Rourke escalated. Our new witness, the data engineer, reported that Rourke's private security firm was installing a new facial recognition system at every terminal gate. They were actively hunting for faces, for my face. The final blow came on a Thursday night. I was late, meeting Gino to pick up Leo from the greenhouse. Sandro was in a meeting I knew I wasn't supposed to ask about. Leo and I were going to my place for pizza. It was our new routine, a small slice of normalcy. When I unlocked my apartment door, I knew the air was wrong, cold. The door swung open. My sanctuary had been ransacked. It wasn't a simple burglary. It was a professional, targeted violation. My computer was gone. My file cabinets were emptied. Cushions were slashed. Books thrown from shelves. They had been looking for something specific. And in the middle of the chaos, standing on the one rug they hadn't overturned, was Leo. He had walked in ahead of me. He was just standing there, frozen. His eyes were wide, taking in the destruction. My destruction, his small body began to tremble, a vibration so violent it looked like he might shake apart. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His hands flew to his head, pulling at his hair. He was having a full-blown meltdown, the trauma of the diner, the attempted kidnapping. And now this. It was too much. I rushed to him, pulling him into my arms, signing, "Safe. I'm here. You're safe." But he couldn't see me. He was locked inside his own terror. That's how Sandro found us. He burst through the door, gun drawn. His face a mask of cold fury. He took in the scene in one sweep, the room, me and his son, who was now sobbing, silent. Terrible sobs that racked his whole body. Sandro didn't say a word. He holstered his weapon, knelt, and gently extricated Leo from my arms. He pulled his son into his own chest, one large hand cradling the back of Leo's head, the other signing, "I have you. I am here. Papa's here." He looked at me, his eyes dark with a promise of retribution. "They took your research." I nodded, numb. The trust documents, my mother's file, everything. He stood up, balancing Leo on his hip. Leo buried his face in his father's neck, his small hands gripping Sandro's coat. "Gino!" Sandro's voice was a roar. Gino appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Pack a bag for Miss Ellis, whatever's left. She's not staying here." "Where are we going?" I whispered, the adrenaline finally leaving, replaced by a bone-deep cold. Sandro looked at me, his expression softening just a fraction as he looked at the two of us, the woman he'd pulled into his war, and the son he was trying to save. "We're going to the safe house," he said. "All three of us. Tonight, we are just a family. And no one, Mara," he said, his voice dropping to that lethal hum. "No one touches my family." The safe house was a sterile box of white walls and new furniture that smelled like plastic. It had kept us safe for 72 hours, a suffocating, quiet pause before the storm. But the town hall hearing was set for 10 a.m. Rourke had stolen my research, but he hadn't stolen my identity. I was still Maya Ellis, heir to the Parker Ellis Trust, and I was going to walk into that hearing and stake my claim. Sandro insisted on driving us, not in one of his black sedans, but in a reinforced suburban SUV that looked deceptively normal. Gino, his arm in a sling from the ambush, but his eyes sharp, rode shotgun. I was in the back, wedged between Leo and Sandro. Leo was nervous. He kept signing bad men against my arm. I signed back. "Good men are with us, and you have me. We are going to speak." Sandro watched us in the rearview mirror. His gaze lingered on my hands, then on my face. There was a warmth there. A fragile trust built in the chaos of my ransacked apartment and the quiet nights at the safe house. He hadn't touched me, not a kiss. Not even a handhold. His discipline was absolute, but the air between us was electric, a heavy, unspoken promise. We were 3 blocks from Town Hall. The traffic on Atlantic Avenue was thick. It happened with the sickening, definitive sound of a train derailment. A dump truck, one of Rourke's construction vehicles, slammed into our front end, shoving us sideways with a screech of tortured metal. The airbags exploded. A violent, powdery punch. Gino was roaring something. The world went white and deafeningly silent. Just for a second, Then the side windows shattered. They weren't Lupetti's street-level thugs. This was Rourke's private security, masked, disciplined, moving in perfect, terrible sync. They emerged from 2 black vans that had boxed us in. They used smoke grenades, filling the street with a thick, gray fog. Sandro was roaring, trying to get his door open, but it was crumpled. "Leo, Maya, stay down." A hand reached through the broken window beside me. Grabbing for Leo, I shielded him with my body, screaming, and felt a sharp, searing pain as something hard, the butt of a rifle, crashed against my temple. Stars exploded behind my eyes. I felt Leo being ripped away from me. "No, Leo." I heard Sandro's voice, a sound of pure, primal rage, but he was trapped. Gino was trying to return fire, but they were overwhelmed. I scrambled out of the broken window, falling onto the pavement. The smoke was choking. I saw him, a man in black tactical gear, shoving Leo into the back of a van. Leo saw me. His face was a mask of sheer terror, his hands frozen. The man looked at me, raised his weapon, and I saw the red dot of a laser sight paint my chest. "Go!" Sandro yelled. Gino had tackled the man. A desperate, one-armed lunge. The man shoved Gino off, into the path of another operative. The van door slammed shut. The tires screamed. In less than 30 seconds, they were gone. The smoke cleared, revealing the carnage. Our SUV was a wreck. Gino was on the ground, bleeding from a new wound in his leg, but he was alive, already on the phone, his face gray. Sandro was kneeling on the asphalt, his hands clenched, his head bowed. The street was silent, save for the distant, growing wail of sirens. My head throbbed, and when I touched my temple, my fingers came away wet and red. It wasn't a kidnapping, it was an extraction. We never made it to the safe house. Sandro took me to a secure room beneath a bakery in Carroll Gardens, a place that smelled of yeast and gunpowder. A doctor, an old man with sad eyes, stitched the gash on my head. Gino was already there, leg bandaged. Sandro's phone, a disposable burner, buzzed on the steel table. He opened the text. His face, already pale, lost all its color. He didn't read it. He just handed the phone to me. It was a picture of Leo. He was in a small, dark room, sitting on a metal stool. He was safe, but his eyes were huge. Below it, a single line of text. She signs the waiver. The boy comes home. You have 2 hours. The waiver, my veto power, all of it. Rourke didn't just want the port. He wanted me legally and permanently neutered. Sandro looked at me, and the man I knew, the capo, the protector, the strategist was gone. In his place was just a father, a broken one. "I'll do it," he whispered, his voice raw. "I'll trade myself. I'll sign the port over. Whatever he wants, I'll give him everything. Just get me my son." "No," I said, my voice shaking. The doctor finished his work and quietly left the room. It was just us and the low hum of the ovens above. "Maya, you don't understand?" "I do understand," I stood up, the room swimming for a second. "He doesn't want you. Sandro, he wants me to sign. And if I do, if you give in, what was it all for? What about Gino's leg? What about the families at the terminal? What about the deaf center? Rourke wins. He gets the port. He levels the community. And he still has Leo. He'll never let him go. We'll have no leverage left. He is my son." Sandro slammed his fist on the table, went a crack of thunder that rattled the shelves. "And he is my student," I shot back, my heart hammering. "I know him. You think he'd want you to surrender? You think he'd want you to give up everything you protect? Just for him, he's your son. He's brave." Sandro stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes a war of fury and despair. I had to think. I am a data analyst. I find patterns. Think, Maya, think like Leo. "He'll leave us something," I whispered. "He knows we'll come. He's smart." I closed my eyes, picturing Leo, his drawings, the signs we invented. Lighthouse? Our code, the one I used in the first ambush. Safe place. Hold on. "The lighthouse," I said, my eyes snapping open. "He's obsessed with them. He's always drawing the one at Coney Island, but he's always wanted to go on the ferry, to see the big ones up close, the Staten Island ferry. That's half the city. Maya, a hunch." Sandro's voice was dismissive, laced with pain. "It's not a hunch. It's a data point. Where would they take him? Somewhere Rourke controls, near the port, near the ferry terminal. He'd leave a sign, a drawing, anything." Sandro looked at me, then at Gino. A spark of the capo returned to his eyes. He grabbed his phone. "It's a start. Gino, get me everyone. I want every fisherman, every truck driver, every shop owner from Red Hook to St. George. I want eyes on every street." He turned to me. "What do you need?" This was it, the alliance. "I need a laptop, a secure line. I'm going to pull every traffic cam and storefront security feed within a 10-block radius of that terminal. Rourke's men are tech-heavy, but the people who own the bodegas aren't. They use old-school systems. I can get in. For the next hour, we worked. 2 worlds, 1 purpose. Sandro's voice was a low, commanding rumble, dispatching his network of street honor, men who owed him. I was a phantom, my fingers flying across a keyboard, breaching firewalls, pulling grainy, time-stamped footage. A call came in. A fishmonger. He'd seen a black van. No plates. Pull into the old, abandoned North Atlantic refrigerated warehouse complex, right by the ferry depot. They move fish in there, Gino said, his face grim. Rourke's Imports, it's a Lupetti front. He'll be in a cold room, I said, my blood turning to ice. Leo was sensitive to the cold. The warehouse was a fortress of rusted metal and concrete. Sandro's men, a dozen of them, materialized from the fog rolling off the water. They were armed, ready for war. No, Sandro said, scanning the building. We go in quiet. He'll have men on Leo. If they hear us, the boy is gone. I spotted it, high up, a ventilation shaft, the cover hanging by 1 bolt. I can fit, I said. Absolutely not, nah. Sandro snapterana. You don't have a choice, I hissed. You need eyes inside. I'm the only one small enough, and I'm the only one Leo will trust. I have to be the one to find him. He stared at me, his face carved from granite. He hated it, but he knew I was right. He gave me a small earpiece. You signal me the second you see him. Gino gave me a boost. The shaft was tight, dark, and freezing. It smelled of rust and dead fish. I crawled for what felt like miles, guided only by the faint light of grates below. Then I heard a whimper. I looked down through a grate. Below me was a large, insulated cold storage room, and in the center, tied to a steel chair, was Leo. He was shivering, his lips blue. 2 Lupetti thugs were in the corner, playing cards on a crate. My heart shattered. He looked so small. I pulled out my phone. I couldn't call. I couldn't risk the noise. I covered the phone's flash with my thumb, leaving only a pinprick of light. I aimed it at his face. I flashed it tap, 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 tap. L. Tap, tap, tap. E. Tap, 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 tap. Oh. His head snapped up. His eyes, wide with terror, found the grate. He saw the light. He saw me. The relief that flooded his face gave me the strength to breathe. He subtly nodded. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. I tapped the earpiece. I have him. Room B4. 2 guards. He's cold. Sandro. He's cold. On my way, Sandro's voice whispered back. The explosion was precise. Not the door, but the wall next to it. Sandro and his men didn't storm in. They flowed in. It was controlled, terrifying chaos. Before the 2 guards could even stand, they were neutralized, falling without a sound. I smashed the grate with the heel of my boot and dropped the 10 feet to the floor, landing hard. Maya, Leo cried out, his voice a hoarse, unused croak. I ran to him, fumbling with the knots. They were tight. It's okay, baby, I'm here. Sandro was checking the guards. They're not the ones in charge. Where's the capo? Gino yelled from the outer office. Boss in here. I saw a heavy backpack on the floor by the card table. The men's. I grabbed it, slinging it over my shoulder. I didn't know why. I just knew we couldn't leave anything. I sliced the last rope on Leo's wrist with a pocket knife Sandro had tossed me. I scooped him up. He was light and trembling violently. We ran to the outer office. The Lupetti captain was there, a larger man with dead eyes, already on his knees. Gino's weapon to his head. Sandro walked up to him. The rage was back, but it was Arctic cold. Where is Rourke? Sandro's voice was a deadly whisper. The man spat. Go to hell! Gino, Sandro said. Get them out of here now! Gino grabbed my arm. Maya, let's go. Sandro, I pleaded. We have Leo. Let's just go. He looked at me, then at Leo, who was staring at his father. Sandro's face was a mask of cold fury, the face of the Vitale boss. Then we heard it. A shout from the hallway. "They're in here!" One of the Lupetti men I'd thought was down must have had a radio. "Go!" Sandro roared, shoving us toward a back exit. We were running down a steel catwalk when a shot rang out. It wasn't aimed at us. It was aimed at Sandro, who was right behind us, shielding us. Gino Loyal. Brave Gino shoved Sandro so hard he crashed into me and Leo, sending us all sprawling. Gino grunted, a short, sharp exhalation of breath. He stopped. He looked down at his chest, where a dark stain was blossoming. "Gino," Sandro screamed, scrambling back to him. "Go, boss," Gino wheezed. Slumping against the railing, he looked at Leo. "Protect the boy, go." He collapsed. Sandro tried to lift him, but it was too late. Gino was gone. Leo was watching, his small face pale, his eyes wide and terribly clear. He wasn't crying. He just stared at the man who had given his life for him. He looked at his father, his hands shaking, not from cold, but from understanding. He signed, his movements heartbreakingly precise. He protected family. Sandro Vitale let out a sound of pure anguish, a roar that echoed through the freezing, empty warehouse. He scooped up Leo, grabbed my hand, and dragged us out into the cold, gray dawn, leaving a part of his own family behind. As we stumbled into the alley, I clutched the heavy backpack. I had a feeling the hard drive inside it, the one I'd grabbed on instinct, was the only thing that could make Gino's sacrifice mean something. Gino was gone. The weight of his sacrifice settled on us, heavier than the fog rolling in from the harbor. We didn't grieve. There was no time. We drove, not to the safe house, but to a high-rise in Midtown, the kind of glass and steel tower that represented everything Sandro's world was not. The backpack I'd grabbed on instinct sat on a polished mahogany table. Inside, nestled among tactical gear, was a hard drive. It was Rourke's entire shadow ledger, the bribe payments to city council members, the illegal contracts with Lupetti, the offshore accounts, Martiu, and the kill order for the Sunset Marine Terminal crane, the accident that had taken Sandro's wife. My hands were shaking. This was it, the proof I needed. Ava Moreno, the trust's lawyer, was a sharp woman in a razor-creased suit. Her eyes went wide as I plugged the drive into her laptop. "My God, Maya," she whispered. "This isn't just a smoking gun. This is the whole armory." The next morning, Ava and I walked into the U.S. Attorney's office. We were no longer just a woman with a claim. We were the prosecution's star witnesses. The feds wanted Sandro. Rourke's ledger is one thing. The prosecutor, a stern man named Diaz, said, "But we need a narrator. We need someone to connect Rourke to Lupetti, to put him at the center of the conspiracy. We need Mr. Vitale." I brought the request to Sandro. He was standing on the terrace of the Staten Island house, staring at the water, his face a mask of grief for Gino. "They want me to be a rat," he said, his voice flat. "They want you to be a witness," I countered softly, "against the man who did this, the man who ordered Gino's end, the man who tried to take your son." He was silent for a long time, watching a container ship slide by. "I'll do it," he said finally, "on one condition. The federal package for the new port development, it will include full, permanent funding and protected status for the Red Hook Deaf Center and its community programs. Not a request, a term of my testimony." He was leveraging his entire criminal capital, not for immunity, but for a community center. Rourke didn't wait for the indictment. He hit back, not with guns, but with cameras. My face was everywhere. The New York Post, the local news. Vitale's mistress tries to halt city's future. They painted me as a gold digger, a naive girl seduced by the mafia, using a technicality, my long-lost inheritance, to do a crime boss's bidding. Rourke's PR team was brilliant, twisting my fight for the Deaf Center into a mafia power grab. My old supervisor, Mark, even gave an interview, claiming I was unstable and obsessed with dark figures. I was drowning in the narrative. "I have to fix this," I told Sandro. He wanted to make a few calls, to make the problem disappear. "No," I insisted, just as I had in his study. "My way, the law, and the truth." I called my own press conference. I didn't hold it at a fancy hotel. I held it on the steps of the Red Hook Deaf Center, which was plastered with eviction notices. Sister Helen, the fierce nun who ran the center, stood beside me. The news crews came, smelling blood, expecting a tearful denial. I stepped up to the microphone, and I didn't speak. I raised my hands. "My name is Maya Ellis. I signed," Sister Helen translated, her voice ringing with conviction. "The man you are calling a developer, Damian Rourke, tried to kidnap this man's son, a 9-year-old boy named Leo." I told them everything. I talked about Leo being ignored in the diner. I talked about his isolation. I talked about the tutors who called him troublesome. "You want to talk about dark figures?" I signed, my hands sharp, my eyes finding the camera lens. "Let's talk about a man so obsessed with money he'd terrorize a deaf child. Let's talk about a system that ignores the voiceless. Mr. Rourke wants to paint me as a criminal. I am a teacher, I am a data analyst, and I am my mother's daughter. This center was important to her. And this community," I gestured to the people standing behind me, "is not for sale." The narrative shattered. By nightfall, the headlines had changed. The woman who spoke for the voiceless. The town hall meeting was a circus. Rourke's lawyers were there, looking pale. The council members who I now knew were on his payroll looked sick. The federal prosecutor, Diaz, was sitting in the front row, a clear, silent threat. Rourke's team tried to argue that I had no standing, that my identity was in question, that the trust documents had been stolen from my apartment. Ava Moreno stood up. "My client doesn't need those documents. She has this." She produced my original state-issued birth certificate and my mother's will, which my adoptive father had tearfully given me that morning. I was called to the podium. I didn't look at Rourke's team. I looked at the council president. "I am Maya Elizabeth Ellis, heir to the Parker Ellis Trust, as per the codicil of Elizabeth Parker Ellis. I am enacting my right of minority veto on the sale or redevelopment of the Sunset Marine Terminal and its adjacent properties. This project," I said, my voice clear and strong, "is corrupt. It does not have my consent." I signed my name. The gavel fell. The project was frozen, pending a full federal investigation. "We won," the room erupted. But as Sandro guided me and Leo through the crowd, his face was grim. "It's not over," he murmured, his hand a heavy, protective weight on my back. "A man like Rourke, when you take his money, you've taken his life. He has nothing left to lose." That night, the Staten Island compound was quiet. Too quiet. Leo was asleep. Finally, in his own bed, clutching a small wooden lighthouse I'd bought him. Sandro and I sat in the greenhouse, the place where Leo had learned to name his feelings. "He'll come here," Sandro said, staring at the glass walls. "He knows this is Leo's space. He'll want to spoil it. He's an animal. And he's cornered." "The security," I started. "Your men—" "My men are clear," Sandro said. "This can't be a street fight. It has to be clean. It has to be your way." He showed me. The entire perimeter of the property was now plastered with new, highly visible, legally registered no trespassing signs. "Any breach is a federal offense, not just a local one," he explained. He tapped one of the security cameras, hidden among the orchids. "And this feed, it isn't just going to my security office. It's streaming live to a server in the U.S. Attorney's building. Diaz is watching. His team is 5 minutes out, waiting for the signal." It was a trap, a legal trap, baited with Sandro himself. The alarms were silent. A small, flashing red light on Sandro's phone was the only warning. They were here. "Stay back," he ordered, pushing me behind a massive terracotta planter, "and stay hidden." He handed me a small audio recorder, just in case. The glass doors of the greenhouse burst open. Not Lupetti thugs. This was Rourke's private security, dressed in black, armed with suppressed weapons. They fanned out, their movements precise. And then Damian Rourke walked in. He was wearing a sleek black coat, his face perfectly calm. He looked serene. "Alessandro," Rourke said, his voice casual, as if they were meeting for drinks, "you've caused me a great deal of trouble." Sandro stepped out from behind the lemon tree. He was unarmed. "It's over. Rourke, the feds have the drive. The council voted. You've lost." Rourke chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Lost, oh, no. I'm just cleaning up loose ends. That's the problem with you old world dinosaurs. You think a ledger, a vote, you think that's power. Power is this." He motioned to his men. "Power is removing the obstacle." "Like you removed my wife." Sandro's voice was dangerously quiet. I held my breath. My thumb was pressed hard on the record button. "The crane," Rourke sighed, stepping closer. "That was unfortunate. A shame. She was sniffing around, just like that interfering teacher of yours. She should have stayed away. She should have taken the paycheck and kept her mouth shut, just like you should have stayed in your little corner of Brooklyn. Vitale." He was boasting, confessing, admitting to all of it, right into my recorder. "You come into my home," Mayor Sandro said, his voice a low growl. "You threaten my son, you attack his teacher, and you admit to killing my wife. You've broken every code." "I don't play by your codes," Rourke sneered. "I play to win." He raised his hand, signaling his men. "Good," Sandro said. "Neither do I." The world exploded in light. Every floodlight on the compound clicked on, turning the night into day. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Federal agents, drop your weapons. You are trespassing on private property. Hands in the air." Rourke spun around, his face a mask of pure disbelief. Flashbangs detonated at the entrances. Black-clad SWAT teams flooded the greenhouse, moving like a tidal wave. Rourke's men, caught between the feds and an unarmed Sandro, dropped their weapons. Rourke just stared, his arrogance finally cracking. Diaz, the prosecutor, walked up to him. Handcuffs in hand, "Damian Rourke, you're under arrest for trespassing, conspiracy, racketeering, and for the murder of Elizabeth Vitale." As they led him away, his eyes found me, still half hidden by the planter. The hatred in that look was so pure it almost made me flinch. It was over. The greenhouse was filled with agents and smoke. The doors opened again. Leo stood there, his eyes wide. He scanned the room, saw the broken glass, the armed men, his father and me. He ran. He didn't run to Sandro. He ran straight to me, crashing into my legs and wrapping his arms around my waist, holding on so tight I could barely breathe. I dropped to my knees, holding him. He pulled back, his small face intense. He looked at me, then at Sandro, then back at me. He raised his hands, his movements clear and perfect, no fear left in them. "Home," he signed, touching his cheek and mouth. "Safe," he signed, crossing his hands over his chest. He paused, then signed the last one, the sign he'd seen me use, the old sign, the one for our circle. Family. I was crying, silent tears tracing paths through the grime on my face. I looked up. Sandro was watching us. The cold iron of the capo was gone. The raw grief for Gino was there, but so was something else. He wasn't looking at me like the woman he was protecting. He wasn't looking at me like Leo's teacher. He was looking at me like I was the other pillar holding up his sky. The silence after the arrest was louder than any explosion. The greenhouse, our sanctuary, was a mess of shattered glass, potting soil, and the tactical debris of a federal raid, but Leo was asleep in his bed, safe, and Rourke was in a cell. The days that followed were a whirlwind, not of violence, but of procedure. Rourke was indicted on a string of federal charges that would have made a seasoned gangster blush: RICO, conspiracy, wire fraud, and, thanks to my recording, the solicitation of murder. The U.S. Attorney, Diaz, held a press conference. He didn't mention me by name, but he talked about brave community members and incontrovertible evidence. With Rourke's money frozen and his organization decapitated, the Lupetti crew dissolved. They were animals without a zookeeper, and they scattered back into the shadows. Rourke's network of corrupt city officials and waterfront cops fell like dominoes. The ledger I'd grabbed, the drive Gino had indirectly died for, was a map to the entire rot at the heart of the city's waterfront development. The media, of course, did a complete 180, I wasn't the mafia mistress anymore. Overnight, I became the Sunset Marine savior or the Red Hook heroine. They camped outside the Staten Island compound. They dug into my past, painting a narrative of the long-lost heiress returning to save her mother's legacy. It all felt strange, distorted. They were praising a version of me that didn't feel real. The real work began a week later, in a sterile boardroom with Ava Moreno, the trust's lawyer. The Parker Ellis Trust was in chaos. The board members, who had been complicit in Rourke's plans, were terrified. "They're expecting you to liquidate, Maya," Ava said, adjusting her glasses. "They're expecting a lawsuit. They are not expecting you to show up with a 5-year plan." "They'd better learn fast," I said. My first act as the active heir was to kill the Sunrise Holdings shell company. The eviction notices at the Red Hook Deaf Center were torn down, not by protesters, but by a maintenance crew I hired. We didn't just save the center. The trust funded a massive, multi-million-dollar expansion. We bought the whole block. We were building a new gymnasium, a state-of-the-art audiology clinic, and vocational training labs. My second act was the port itself. The city still wanted a functional terminal. Rourke's vision of luxury condos was dead, but the docks were still the lifeblood of the neighborhood. "So what do we do?" Ava asked. "The trust holds the veto." "We don't veto, we direct," I said, sliding a folder across the table. My old life as a data analyst felt like a lifetime ago, but the skills were what I needed now. I'm calling it the Harbor Commons Project. We're not building high-rises. We're building a community-integrated port. I became the director of the project. My desk was no longer in a cubicle farm. It was in a trailer overlooking the very docks Rourke had tried to steal. We allocated 20% of the new jobs specifically for local hires, with scholarships for maritime engineering. We built an urgent care clinic right on the pier, open to all port employees and their families, free of charge, and in the new administrative building, right next to the cafeteria. We installed a classroom, my classroom. I made ASL immersion classes a mandatory part of orientation for all senior staff. While I was building with permits and union contracts, Sandro was remodeling. His transformation wasn't sudden. It wasn't a deathbed conversion. It was a calculated, pragmatic shift. He had given his testimony. He had kept his word. And in doing so, he had painted a target on the back of his family. The old ways, the gambling dens, the loan sharking they were liabilities. They were entry points for the feds he was now, technically, allied with. He was honoring Gino, not with a spray of bullets, but by making the organization legitimate. He started by cutting the illicit ties. The businesses that operated in the darkest gray areas were sold off or simply shuttered. He then focused on what his family always did best: protection. He held a meeting with all the local business owners, from the fishmongers to the trucking dispatchers. He offered them a new deal. No more cash in envelopes. He formalized it. He created the South Brooklyn Civic Security Union. It was on paper, a fraternal order and a private security guild. It offered members health insurance benefits, legal counsel, and logistical security. It was still Sandro's organization. It still had teeth, but now it operated within the boundaries of the law. It was a fortress built of contracts and bylaws, not just back-alley intimidation. He was turning his power from a blunt instrument into a finely honed legal shield. Our true north, the compass for this entire new world, was Leo. The terror that had haunted him since the cold room began to recede. He continued his therapy, but the real healing happened in the community. He wasn't the isolated boy in the glass house anymore. He made 2 friends at the Deaf Center's new after-school program. He even started teaching. I'd come home to the compound and find Leo in the garden, patiently showing Sandro's new union men the difference between the sign for wait and help. They learned, out of respect for their boss and, I think, out of genuine affection for the kid. They learned. He started a journal. He'd sit in the greenhouse, propping my phone up on a stack of books, and record video sign logs. He'd talk about his day, the frustrations of math homework, the story of a new friend. He was, for the first time in his life, crafting his own narrative in his own language. He was no longer just being seen. He was asking to be heard. My own identity was the last piece to settle. The hero label felt as fake as the mistress label. My old data firm sent me a certified letter formally terminating my employment for ethics concerns, a final, petty jab from my old supervisor, Mark. For a while, I felt that old sting, the humiliation of being defined by someone else. When I walked into boardrooms for the Harbor Commons project, I could feel the executives and politicians watching me. Is she his puppet? Is she a victim? Is she dangerous? They were trying to fit me into a box I no longer fit. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't just an heiress. I wasn't an accessory. I was the director. I was the one who had read the data, found the flaw, and executed the plan. Sandro had provided the muscle, but I had provided the strategy. I wasn't a pawn in someone else's story. I was the creator of my own. That realization settled in my bones, a new kind of strength. Sandro and I found our new rhythm in the quiet moments. The tension between us, that heavy, unspoken current, was still there. But it was different. The desperation was gone, replaced by a deep, shared understanding. One evening, I found him on the terrace, watching the lights of the Verrazano Bridge. He had learned to trust the system, not fully, but minimally. He'd seen the law, my world, actually work. He'd seen it protect his son and his community in a way his guns never could have. "They'll sentence Rourke next week, yes?" he said, not looking at me. "Diaz is pushing for life. No parole." "Gino would be proud," I said softly. "Gino's gone." His voice was rough. "This new way, it's harder. It's slower." "It's permanent," I said. I stood beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his suit jacket, but not touching. "What you're building, what we're building, it lasts." He turned to face me. His eyes, which had held so much cold fury and grief, were just quiet. He looked at me for a long time, as if seeing me for the first time without the filter of chaos. "I made a promise to myself. After my wife," he said, his voice low, "that I would never let anyone close to this life again, that I would keep Leo safe, even if it meant he was isolated." "And now?" I whispered. "And now, you—" He reached out, but he didn't grab my arm or touch my face. He just took my hand. His calloused thumb brushed over my knuckles, the ones that had been bruised from smashing the grate in the cold room. "You were never supposed to be part of this, Maya, but you became the center of it. You were the one who spoke. You were the one who held us together." "We held each other," I corrected. "We did," he agreed. He stepped closer, and the air between us crackled, not with danger, but with a heat that was steady and sure. "But this path, the legal one, it's your path. I'm just learning to walk it." "So we walk it together," I said. He nodded. A small, solemn movement, but we make a pact. This new way, this is the only way. The law, the community, the union, no more back alleys. "And violence?" I asked, needing to hear it. He looked out at the water. "Violence," he said, "is the last resort, the absolute last. When every other door is closed, when it's the only way to protect our family." He looked back at me, his gaze intense. "That's my promise to you, Maya, and to Leo." He didn't kiss me, not then, just held my hand, and for the first time since I'd walked into that diner months ago, I felt completely, utterly safe. We had an agreement, a new code, and it was one we had written together. It took 1 year to tear down the last vestiges of Rourke's corruption and build something new. 12 months of fighting with contractors, poring over blueprints, and holding community town halls that were often just shouting matches. Today, the Sunset Marine Terminal was gone, in its place. The Harbor Commons stood bright and gleaming under a clear October sky. The change was absolute. Where there had been rusted fences and no trespassing signs, there was now a sprawling pier-side park with a playground. The cold storage warehouse where Leo had been held, I'd had it demolished myself. in its place. We built the Sunset Market, a co-op for the local fishermen and merchants. Sal, the dock worker who had been one of our first witnesses, was running it. The terminal itself was leaner, greener, and more efficient, and the new ferry stop connected Red Hook's labor force directly to Manhattan, cutting commute times in half. Today was the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The crowd was a mix I never could have imagined a year ago. Stern-faced federal agents in suits stood shoulder to shoulder with salty old fishermen in rubber boots. Sister Helen and a group of beaming students from the expanded deaf center were in the front row. Diaz, the welder, was there with her family. Even my adoptive father had come, looking proud and slightly terrified. And then there was Sandro. He wasn't on the podium. He stood off to the side, near the new security office for his civic security union, which now had the official city contract to protect the entire commons. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored suit, but he looked more like a guardian than a guest. He caught my eye and nodded, a single, sharp gesture of support. I stepped up to the microphone. The wind whipped my hair, and I smelled the salt and, faintly, the fresh bread from the new bakery in the market. "Welcome," I said, my voice carrying over the crowd. "Welcome to the Harbor Commons." I paused, and a small figure stepped up beside me. Leo. He was 10 years old now, and the fear that had haunted his eyes was gone, replaced by a bright, steady confidence. He wore a small blue suit, his hair neatly combed. I looked at him, and he gave me a quick, professional nod. I raised my hands. "When I first came to this part of the city," I said, speaking and signing at the same time, "I met a boy who was scared and who had no voice, not because he couldn't speak." Leo's hands moved, mirroring mine, his small face serious as he interpreted for the deaf members of the crowd, his eyes scanning them with a practiced ease. But because no one was listening, I looked out at the crowd, at the politicians who had once taken Rourke's money, at the reporters who had once called me a mistress. "This place," I continued, "was built on the idea of listening. We listened to the community that needed jobs. We listened to the families that needed a safe place for their children to play. We listened to the neighbors who had been told for decades that their voices didn't matter." My gaze found Sandro's. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes never left mine. "We often think that power is about who can shout the loudest, but today, this place is proof that true power, it's about who you choose to listen to, who you choose to protect." I finished my speech, and the applause was warm and real, but I was only half done. I stepped back from the microphone and turned to Leo. I nodded. It was his turn. He stepped up to the podium, which was a little too tall for him. He looked out at the crowd, his small hands raised. He signed, and I became his voice, translating for the hearing members of the audience, my voice thick with a pride that was almost suffocating. "My name is Leo Vitale Wam," he signed, his movements clear and strong. "I love this place, because my new mom built it." The crowd chuckled, and I felt my face flush. "And my dad keeps it safe. This is our home. This is our family circle. Thank you for coming." He stepped back, and the applause was deafening. Sandro was clapping, a slow, proud beat, a small smile playing on his lips. Leo ran to me, and I pulled him into a one-armed hug, kissing the top of his head. That night, the celebration was over, the politicians gone. The Harbor Commons was quiet, lit by the new, warm-toned security lights. I found Sandro on the pier, past the playground, staring out at the water. "He called you Mom," Sandro said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "I heard," I whispered, stepping up beside him. "He's been practicing that speech for a week. He was terrified he'd forget a sign." He was perfect," Sandro said. He reached into his coat pocket. "He wasn't the only one." He pulled out a small, heavy object. It was an antique compass, brass and worn, the glass scarred with age. It felt warm in his hand. "This was my father's," he said. "He was a fisherman, before all this. He came from the old country with nothing but this. He used it to navigate the sea, to find his way home in the fog. He pressed it into my hand. It was heavy, real. He told me that no matter how dark it gets, a compass always knows true north. It can't be tricked. It can't be bought. It just is. He looked at me, and his dark eyes, which had held so much pain and fury, were now just clear. "You're my true north, Maya. You're the one who came into the fog and pointed the way. You're the conscience of this family. Its future. I want you to have this, to keep us on course." I closed my hand around it, the metal biting into my palm. "Sandro, I don't—" "Just take it," he said softly. "It belongs to you." We stood in silence for a long time, the only sound the lapping of the water against the new pilings. A week later, he took me to Coney Island. It was late, almost November. The park was closed for the season, a skeleton of dark rides against the night sky, but the old lighthouse at the edge of the point was lit, its beam cutting a steady, lonely path across the black water. We walked on the cold sand, the wind biting at our faces. There was no pretense, no grand romantic gesture. He just stopped, a few yards from the surf, and turned to face me. "This was Leo's symbol," he said, nodding toward the light. "Hope, a safe place." "I remember," I said. He took my hands. His were warm, calloused. "I can't promise you peace. Maya, this life, the one we've chosen, it will always have enemies. There will always be another Rourke, another fight." "I know," I said. "I'm not an easy man. I carry ghosts. I carry Gino. I carry my wife. I carry the things I did before you. I carry my own ghosts, Sandro." He looked down at our joined hands. "I'm not promising you a quiet life. I'm not promising you easy. I'm promising you my loyalty. I'm promising to protect you, and Leo, with every piece of this new world we've built. I'm promising to follow our code, to follow you." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine in the sweeping beam of the lighthouse. "I'm promising you my whole life. Will you marry me? Maya Ellis." I looked at this man, this former capo, this grieving father, this reluctant civic leader. I thought of the man in the diner, the man in the greenhouse, the man who had torn down a warehouse for his son. "I'm not looking for easy, Sandro," I whispered, my heart so full it ached. "I'm just looking for you, for Leo, for us." I squeezed his hands. "Yes, I'll marry you." He didn't pull me into a passionate movie star kiss. He just let out a long, slow breath, a breath he looked like he'd been holding for 10 years. He leaned in and pressed his forehead against mine, his eyes closing. "Thank you," he whispered. A word of such profound relief it was more intimate than any kiss. Our lives didn't stop. They expanded. 6 months later, I received a certified letter. The Parker Ellis Trust, inspired by the success of the Harbor Commons, was restructuring. They invited me to join the National Board of Directors to oversee all their community and urban development projects. I accepted. Sandro's Civic Security Union signed its first major partnership with the City of New York, a multi-year contract to coordinate community policing efforts in all 5 boroughs. He was in the paper, not as a suspect, but as an innovator. And Leo sat at the big wooden table in the greenhouse, the afternoon sun streaming in. He was carefully, meticulously, filling out an application. It was for a summer pre-college program at a prestigious visual arts school for deaf and hard-of-hearing students. His sign log videos had become his portfolio, a vibrant, expressive collection of his thoughts and his art. I sat across from him, sipping my coffee. Sandro's father's compass on the table beside my laptop. Sandro was standing by the door, watching us, a quiet protector. I looked at them, my 2 boys, my whole world, here in this room of glass and light, and I realized it was all true. Family is the language we choose to speak to the world with our hands and with our hearts.